Claire had never been big on New Year's Eve. As friends danced in glittery dresses and packed bars, she liked to hole up in her small apartment downtown. Tonight was no exception. At 26, she had become accustomed to solitude not by choice, but by necessity. Her family lived states away. Her last relationship ended poorly, and her social circle had slowly drifted apart in the chaos of adult life. Yet, she told herself she didn't mind. She had her cozy apartment, a bottle of red wine, and the promise of fireworks outside her window at midnight. The wall clock was ticking away as Claire wrapped herself in a soft blanket, sitting up on her couch. Only one other creature was there with her on that quiet evening, Milo purring at her feet. In the distance, laughter and music floated in through her window from a party happening elsewhere. She smiled wistfully, sipping wine and scrolling mindlessly on her phone. It was already close to 10 p.m. when her cell phone vibrated on the table of coffee. She jolted. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. Claire hesitated. She did not answer so many calls from those whom she didn't recognize. For a second, she had considered letting it pass by, but curiosity pushed it into action. She swiped to answer. "Hello?" she said hesitantly. There was no answer. Only a faint static crackle and something else. Breathing, slow, deliberate, and unsettlingly close. "Hello?" Claire repeated, firmer now. The breathing continued, unchanged. She frowned, her pulse racing. "If this is some kind of prank, it's not funny," she said, her voice quivering with annoyance. Then she just hung up, tossing her phone onto the couch with an exasperated sigh. "Whatever. Weirdos," she muttered to Milo, who merely blinked at her before curling back into his nap. The experience unsettled her, but she dismissed it as a mere prank call. At 10:30, she had almost forgotten about it. The warmth of the wine and the soothing rhythm of the ticking clock lulling her back into a state of calm. She put on a movie, letting its cheerful holiday scenes fill the room with noise. But at 11 p.m., the phone rang again. Claire's heart sank. It was the same number. Her hand hovered over the screen, her instincts screaming at her not to answer. But something compelled her. Maybe it was a need for control, a refusal to let fear get the better of her. She answered. "Who is this?" she demanded. Again, the same breathing, slow, deliberate, chilling. Claire felt her stomach twist. "Listen, you freak, stop calling me. I'll call the police if you don't knock it off." The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and Claire thought the caller had hung up. But then, a faint chuckle crackled through the line, low, guttural, and unmistakably sinister. She hung up, her hands trembling as she set the phone down. She just couldn't focus on anything in the following half hour. The movie played, but she did little more than watch it play, her mind racing through possibilities. Was it a person she knew? Someone she met on the street? A complete stranger? Maybe some guy with a bored sense of humor? Milo followed her, sensing unease emanating from her, and his tail twitched back and forth as he watched her pace the small living room. At 11:30, the phone rang once more. Claire didn't respond this time. She sat glued to the screen, her chest constricting with every ring of the number. It rang and rang until it went silent, letting out a silence that could suffocate. A minute later, there was another notification on the screen. Voicemail. Her stomach twisted around as she opened it and hovered her thumb over the play button. Against her better judgment, she pressed it. The voicemail was short, breathing as before, but this time there was something else, a voice. A whisper so faint she had to replay it several times to catch the words. "See you at midnight. See you at midnight. Claire's blood ran cold. She grabbed her phone and called the police. The dispatcher's calm voice did little to ease her panic as she explained the situation. They assured her an officer would be sent to her address, but it might take some time given the holiday. Claire thanked them and hung up, her heart pounding. Midnight was only 20 minutes away. She turned on all the lights in her apartment, grasping onto her phone like a lifeline. Milo meowed nervously at the tension in the air. Claire's eyes caught the clock, 11:50. 10 minutes to go. At 11:55, when she heard the knock, she almost screamed. It was soft but insistent, echoing off the quiet apartment. Claire froze, her mind racing. The police hadn't arrived yet. Could it be them? Or was it? Summoning up her strength, she approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. Nobody was there. Police? Hello? She called out, shaking in her voice. There was no response, just the emptiness of the hall. Claire stepped away from the door, her pulse hammering in her ears. She grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. Milo hissed, his fur standing on end. The clock struck midnight. The phone buzzed in her hand. A text message from the same number. With trembling fingers, she opened it. It was a photo of her, taken from behind as she stood by the window earlier that evening. A cold, suffocating dread enveloped her. She spun around, her eyes scanning the apartment. Every shadow, every corner seemed to loom larger, more menacing. Then she heard it. A whisper, so close it felt like it was right next to her ear. I'm already inside. Claire let out a scream, lowering the knife as she spun about. But there was nobody. The room was totally vacant, yet the atmosphere seemed heavy, oppressive. Milo bolted under the couch and his terrified yowls added to the turmoil. The lights flickered, plunging the apartment into darkness. Claire fumbled for her phone, its weak glow her only source of light. She backed into a corner, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she dialed 911 again. The line connected, but all she could hear was static, and beneath it, the breathing. The breathing became louder, closer. Claire cried into the phone, holding it close as if that could somehow safeguard her. She felt a presence, a crushing weight upon her chest. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The lights flickered back on. The apartment was silent, empty. The police arrived minutes later. Where they found Claire huddled into the corner, holding Milo. They searched the apartment with no evidence of forced entry, nothing to suggest there was ever anyone else inside. Calls, they'd said it was probably some twisted prank, but Claire knew better. She could feel the creeping dread, still feel the weight of something unseen, an invisible presence still watching. She never stayed alone again on New Year's Eve. Before we dive deeper into further story, I just want to quickly mention something important. Check this out. According to the stats, 90% of you are watching my videos, but haven't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second, and it helps me create more amazing content for you. Your support really means a lot. Let's grow this community together. Henry fiddled with the string of fairy lights hanging from the rustic wooden beams of the old house. He couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This New Year's Eve party was going to be epic. The house, a creaking, sprawling estate in the middle of nowhere, had been purchased just weeks earlier by his friend Oliver. It was the perfect setting, secluded, mysterious, and full of charm. "Let's make some memories," Oliver had said earlier that day, slapping Henry on the back as they arranged furniture and stocked up on drinks. Henry grinned, his heart full of anticipation. He'd been through a tough year, a breakup, losing a job, and tonight felt like a fresh start. By 9 p.m., the house was alive with music and laughter. The party buzzed with energy as friends and friends of friends packed into the space. Henry stood by the makeshift bar, clinking glasses with his closest friends. His best friend, Jenny, leaned against the counter, rolling her eyes playfully. "This place is a death trap," she joked, gesturing at the flickering chandelier overhead. "You're sure it's not haunted?" Henry laughed. "Come on, Jen. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's haunted." Jenny smirked, but Henry saw her shiver slightly. The draft in the house had a way of sneaking up on you. He handed her his jacket, trying to brush off her unease. At around 10 p.m., the atmosphere started to change. Henry's phone buzzed with texts from friends scattered throughout the house. "Did you hear that whispering upstairs? Lights in the kitchen keep flickering. Is the wiring messed up? Cold spots everywhere. This place gives me the creeps." Henry dismissed it as paranoia fueled by alcohol and the house's age. But then he felt it himself, a chill that prickled the back of his neck. He turned, expecting to see someone behind him, but the hallway was empty. "You okay?" Jenny asked, standing beside him. Henry tried to smile. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." But Jenny's eyes were scanning the room. "It feels off, like we're not alone." As midnight approached, everyone gathered in the living room, counting down the final seconds of the year. Henry stood near the fireplace, raising his glass as the crowd erupted in cheers. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. The room erupted in cheers and clinking glasses. Then, the front door burst open with a deafening bang. The room fell silent. Standing in the doorway was a group of people, about a dozen strangers, all dressed in elegant 1920s attire. Women in flapper dresses, men in tailored suits and polished shoes. Their faces were pale, their expressions unnervingly blank. "Who are you?" Oliver asked, stepping forward. The tallest man was gaunt, with sunken eyes, and he smiled faintly. "We were invited," he said in a voice that seemed to echo unnaturally. "This is our party." Nobody got a chance to say a word when the strangers strolled into the room as if it belonged to them. The man clapped his hands, and a haunting, old-fashioned melody began to play from nowhere. The strangers began to dance, twirling and swaying with an eerie grace. Henry's chest grew tight as he sat and watched. Something had to be horribly wrong. Jenny and the other guests were like statues, frozen out of their ability to walk and speak. He took hold of Jenny's hand only to find her unable to respond. She stared at him through fearful eyes. The foreigners danced harder, more spasmodically. The suits tore apart, the fancy clothes revealing decaying limbs and hollowed eyes. The air was full of the smell of rotting things and old perfume. "Henry," Jenny whispered huskily, able at last to move. "We have to get out of here." The dancers faded away one by one. The first woman whirled in a blur of movement, her body melting away into a tendril of smoke that vanished into the wall. The others followed, all disappearing into different parts of the room, the floor, the ceiling, the fireplace. The music suddenly stopped. There was oppressive silence now. The only evidence they had ever been there was the lingering scent of decay. Henry and the other guests stood in stunned silence. The air was heavy with tension and fear. The party broke up quickly after that. Nobody wanted to stay in that house a moment longer. Henry, Jenny, and Oliver stayed behind to clean up, their nerves frayed. "We need to figure out what happened," Oliver said, his voice shaking. "This house, it has a history. I know it." Online searches had only a few minutes before yielded such a chilling story. New Year's Eve party of 1923 was held there, and fire had spread, killing all people trapped inside. Their bodies had not been found, and, of course, stories had followed. They stayed there forever, reliving those last moments. Henry stared at the screen, his stomach turning. We were part of their party," he whispered. "They weren't just ghosts. They were waiting for us." None of them ever returned to the house. Oliver sold it within weeks, refusing to speak about what had happened. Henry tried to move on, but every New Year's Eve he felt the phantom chill of that night. The memory of ghostly dancers haunted him, a reminder that some parties are better left unattended. John fidgeted with his tie, twisting it nervously as the car climbed up the winding road to the hilltop mansion. The winter chill was crisp in the air, and the snow-topped trees stood like silent sentinels on both sides of the road. By his side, Sarah laughed warmly, her laughter slicing through his unease. "John, you're always so tense at these things. It's just a party," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her emerald green dress shimmered under the moonlight, and for a moment she looked ethereal. I know, John muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "It's just, I don't like these people. They're too flashy. Too fake." Sarah laughed. "That's why you've got me. I'll make sure you survive through the night." The mansion came into view, impressive and intimidating as the grandeur stood tall. Its towering pillars, along with its Gothic architecture, seemed to be built into a different era. Its golden glow from the windows, which was warm but seemed unnatural, hid whatever darkness might have been hiding just below its surface. Through the night, a strange melody of music and laughter reverberated, very far off and almost chillingly eerie. As they entered, John couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. The guests were dressed to perfection, their laughter and chatter filling the grand hall. Yet, there was a peculiar heaviness in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The floorboards groaned beneath their feet, the sound almost like a whispered warning. The evening progressed as expected, but John's discomfort only deepened. Glasses clinked, and the aroma of expensive champagne filled the room. Sarah seemed to thrive in the environment, her laughter bright and infectious. John, however, couldn't relax. There was something wrong, something deeply, inexplicably wrong. He stepped out and roamed into the mansion. The farther he went from the party, the more hushed it became. Ornate corridors were lined with the serious faces of ancestors. His eyes seemed to be stuck on him, the eyes disapproving, accusative. He swore that some of the figures had changed, that one's mouth had twitched in something like a smile, eyes flickered. In one of the darker corners, he found an old dusty mirror. Something about it drew him in. As he peered into it, his reflection seemed wrong. His face looked gaunt, his eyes hollow. He blinked, and the image returned to normal, but the unease lingered like a shadow in his mind. John? Shh. What are you doing here?" Sarah's voice startled him. He turned to see her standing behind him with a concerned mixture of amusement on her face. "Just needed some air," he said, forcing a fake smile. "This place gives me the creeps." She took his hand, Come back to the party. It's nearly midnight." As they walked back, John felt the walls closing in around him. The shadows stretched and writhed like living things. Laughter from the ballroom seemed distant now, as if it came from underwater. The guests stood in the grand ballroom, a chandelier made of crystals towering over them, casting a dazzling glow throughout the room. To John, however, the light felt harsh, like an interrogation lamp exposing every flaw, every secret. The countdown to the new year had started, and John was on edge. He gripped his champagne glass tightly, his eyes darting around the room. Everyone seemed too perfect, their movements too smooth, their smiles too wide, their eyes lifeless. "Relax, John," Sarah whispered inches from his ear. "To a better year ahead." They clinked glasses. As John raised his to his lips, he stared into the champagne and caught himself seeing Sarah's reflection inside. His breath hitched. It wasn't Sarah. The reflection gazed back at him with hollowness in the eyes, her skin looking like it had long begun to decay. Her mouth moved, and though it was almost inaudible, the words sent a chill straight down to his very center. "I'm already gone." John's hand shook, spilling the champagne. He looked up, but Sarah was gone. "Sarah," he called out, his voice trembling. The room seemed unchanged. The guests continued their revelry, oblivious to his panic. He pushed through the crowd, searching for her. "Have you seen my wife?" he asked one of the guests. But the man simply smiled vacantly and raised his glass. His face began to blur like wax under a flame melting. The music became louder, distorted as if the record was warped. The golden light of the chandelier dimmed, growing sickly green. Laughter turned to whispers, then to guttural growls. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like the ribcage of a sleeping beast. John ran to the nearest exit, but the door wouldn't budge. He turned, and the guests were no longer human, their faces twisted and elongated, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Some had limbs that bent in impossible directions, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Sarah!" he screamed. He pushed his way into another room, gasping for air. The walls closed in on him. Ornate wallpaper writhed like living flesh. There was the mirror he'd seen before. This time, however, it wasn't his reflection staring back. It was Sarah. She was serene, her smile soft but tinged with sadness. "John, stop," she said softly. "It's time to let go." "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Where are you? Where is everyone?" "John, you don't belong here. None of us do. This house, it's a trap. It's where the dead linger, refusing to move on." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Memories flooded back the icy road. The sound of shattering glass, Sarah's scream. The image of her lifeless body, blood staining the snow, came rushing back. "No," he whispered, getting to his knees. "That can't be." Sarah knelt beside him, though, her touch cold and icy fingers against his skin. "You've been here so long, John. I went back for you, but must go. It is too late for me. Don't leave me now," he begged in face-stretching sobs. "I will die without you." She smiled miserably. "I will love you until the day I die. This isn't living, John. You need to find some peace in yourself, please." The room grew dark as she vanished. The house seemed to shudder around him as it mourned. The face in the mirror reflected back to its owner once again, white and corpse-like. This time, John saw quite clearly what was happening here. He wasn't amongst the living. He stands and walked toward the door. The door opened, blindingly bright, in its entrance for the first time what could have been, maybe in an eternity for the heavy weight of it. At last, he's warming. Again, the mansion stood silent with secrets locked within. A year had come and gone. Outside, the world moved on. Nothing new of the souls stuck on the hill. In the distance, faint echoes of laughter still lingered. This was a reminder of the past and that final toast that ended the journey of John.